The next thing is if you're in the survival mode, and this is also going to sound a little contrary to the way some people think about things, is you got to decide what you're not going to do. In my experience, when companies get in trouble, everybody gets a little frenetic. Things get a little more, antsy. Everybody's, oh my goodness, so I got to do that extra sales call. I got to do this. I got to do this. I got to do this. Especially the entrepreneur, And I'm not saying, oh, take it easy and go play golf when your company's in trouble. That's not what I'm talking about. But the fact of the matter is that there is only so much that you can do. And when your company has gotten into the survival mode and things are really a problem, you got to really focus your efforts. Now, how many people here have heard of the 80-20 rule? Have you heard of the 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle? You heard of that? So the Pareto principle was actually originated more than 100 years ago by an Italian named Pareto, and he observed that 80% of the land was owned by 20% of the people. Thought that was cool, and then he went off and did whatever he was going to do. Sometime later, this evolved into an economic observation that in business and in society, it just tends to happen that most things are skewed to the way that the 80-20 rule really is a very real and present way that the world works. So as an example, 80% of your sales will probably come from 20% of your customers. 80% of your problems probably come from 20% of your customers. 80% of your problems with employees come from 20% of your employees. 80% of your healthcare costs in Jamaica probably come from 20% of the population. Whatever it is, some people get confused by this because they say, well, why does that have to happen? I don't know, it just does. It's the way that the world works. But the thing that I think is so important about that observation is actually the reverse part of that. Is that means that 80% of what you're doing is really not producing any value. Think about that. 80% of what you're doing really isn't doing that much for you. Now, entrepreneurs are some of the hardest working people that I know. They bust their tails day in and day out, and I'm sure you guys all do the same thing. And I'm not saying, oh great, now you go get to take it easy. But think about the power if you could refocus your efforts and say, so what is that that's the 80% value? Could I figure out how to do a little more of that and maybe a little less of that stuff that is in that not so valuable mode? It's very hard to do this. It's very hard to decide, I know because the key thing is it's not that there's no value in it. That's usually the trap. But, well, I can see, that one customer, I'd get one more sale from him. Yeah, that's right, but he's a difficult customer. You're going to spend a huge amount of time trying to make him happy. And meanwhile, if you just told him to go away, you'd free up more time so you could find more of these customers over here who are very likely to love what you're doing and keep buying from you and be great customers. That's the trap, the 80-20 trap that we all fall into. So it's one of those things when you're in a turnaround mode, when you're in survival mode, you have to figure this out. If you don't, you will die. There is no doubt about it, because if you continue to put your effort to everything you can't do it all. So, but by doing this, great things can happen, because there's huge power in the fact that 80% of what you're doing really isn't adding that much value to where you're trying to go right now. So if you can refocus those efforts, the results can be phenomenal. So this is something I really urge you to look hard at. What do you think is your 80%? So where this is if you've done this assessment of where you are, and if you figured out, okay, we're cash positive, my cash flow, it's not as much as I'd like, but we're okay. Or I would say conversely, in what I call a controlled bleed. My friend Robert Johnson talked about building his company yesterday, and he went through for a long time when he was building sales, and he wasn't cash flow positive. But it was what I'd call a controlled bleed. He planned on the fact he was going to invest for this period of time. Maybe went a little longer than he thought. But so he had the resources to make that happen. And that's okay. The thing that you don't want to be is in the uncontrolled cash flow situation where you're just bleeding beyond any realm that you can survive and make that happen for an extended period of time. Because again, if that's the case, you're in survival mode. And if you're in survival mode, you got to really take some drastic actions. But assuming you are in a controlled situation, either you're cash flow positive or you're in controlled bleed, Then you can start saying, okay, what do I have to do to grow? And this is an obvious point, but I like to remind it to people. We talked about it a little bit yesterday with the kids who were here. But I like to say, the key to any business is finding a pain and making it go away. And hopefully the worse the pain is, the more somebody's going to pay you to make it go away. Now some people may argue, well, I'm giving an opportunity they didn't have, and okay, that's fine. But especially when times are tough, the real key to your business is find a very acute pain. And if you haven't found enough of an acute pain, guess what? They're probably not going to pay you for it. They're going to, well, it really didn't matter that much. And so you really got to find that to make sure that you can survive and grow in these tough times.